Alright folks, today I'm going to present to you another case of dark environmental storytelling in the Walking Dead universe. If you're unfamiliar with this series, environmental storytelling has been used in The Walking Dead since its inception. A technique where a series of objects or bodies will be laid out in a way that conveys a story to the viewer without explicitly stating what that story is. In today's video, I'm going to be taking a closer look at the scene left behind in the subway tunnels featured in Acheron Parts 1 and 2. I'm going to structure this video by taking you through the story as it was first presented to us, before going back and attempting to piece together the evidence to figure out what happened here. These videos aren't meant to convince you I'm right, just to start a conversation around a small topic I've always found interesting. We will probably never actually get answers to any of these questions anyway, so it's all just for fun in the end. If you have suggestions for future topics, let me know in the comments down below, and drop a sub to see more videos like this. Following the Whisperers' attack on the communities, Hilltop was left in ashes, and Alexandria was barely hanging on by a thread. Our survivors may have defeated their biggest threat yet, but another was rearing its ugly head: starvation. Thankfully, Season 10's bonus episodes would see the reintroduction of Maggie Rhee, who had been off attempting to establish communities across the country to no long-term success. Her latest endeavor was a small community known as the Meridian on the other side of Washington that had recently been raided and overtaken by a group known as the Reapers. But left behind was a surplus of food that was desperately needed for the masses in Alexandria while they got themselves back on their feet. Although the leaders of the coalition were reluctant to engage with another threat, Maggie convinces a group of 12, including Daryl, Negan, and Gabriel, to make the journey back to retrieve the supplies, as if they didn't, Alexandria was gonna starve. However, after heading out, the group would be caught in a thunderstorm and forced to head down into Pyron Metro Station for shelter. A location with a story left behind that'll be our main focus for today. Water damage shows signs of flooding, and graffiti depicting the rise of the dead lines the walls, followed by a single message threatening God himself. It seems someone has occupied the subway since the fall, and pushing a bit deeper, those suspicions would be confirmed as our group encounters a sea of bodies systematically wrapped in plastic. Taking a closer look, our survivors would be shocked to see these bodies hadn't been put down. Instead, they thrashed around inside the bags, silently chomping at the plastic as they tried to get to the first meal they've seen since turning. Why did they not make sound? Well, putting it down and opening the body bag, Daryl discovers their throats had been slashed so deep that not even growls could make their way out. Horrifically, among the bodies lies a child's stuffed bunny, heavily implying whoever did this was cold enough to harm the young. Maggie suspects these people were killed all the way back during the fall, but Negan fears that might not be the case. He wonders if somebody could be actively using these tunnels as some sort of graveyard for their victims. But regardless, Maggie insists they push through, taking out the bagged walkers one by one as they continued forward. However, while passing through, the young Gage is attacked and nearly killed by a large and bloated but silent walker, throat slashed like all the rest. This guy tells me Maggie was right. It has been a very long time since this place was occupied, as the body had clearly been exposed to water from flooding over time. It seems the graveyard, or collection, was abandoned as accessibility to the tunnels became unreliable around times of heavy rainfall. At least that's what I take away from this. Although Gage is saved by Negan, he, along with another companion named Roy, slip away from the group with their extra ammo when nobody is looking out of fear, triggering an argument between Maggie and Negan on whether to press deeper or not, despite their missing supplies, as Negan fears nothing but tribulation lies ahead. Unfortunately, the decision would be decided for them, as a horde of walkers approaches from the way they came. To make a bad situation worse, a locked train car surrounded by rubble blocks their way through, forcing our survivors to climb on top, attempting to find another way inside. However, during the panic, Dog runs beneath the train car to get away, prompting Daryl to follow right behind and separate from the rest of his friends in this subway of horrors. Now, the rest of the group's story this episode doesn't really tell us any more about what went down in here, but if you're curious to where the Meridian story goes, I do have a video going over the Reaper arc as a whole. The same could not be said about Daryl's side of events this episode, however, as after passing through a small hole in the wall found down the tunnel, he is reunited with Dog. But what is found on the other side is what adds layers to this mystery. In the dark lies what appears to have been some sort of camp following the fall that now rots in ruin, but the details left behind paint quite a strange picture. As Daryl flashes his light around, he notices heaps of junk-like items, but among them are signs made of cardboard telling us this was actually some sort of homeless camp from before the fall that survived at least a little while into the apocalypse. And on the walls lies similar graffiti to what we saw in the tunnel's entrance, once again accompanied by sinister messages. What makes this scene extremely strange, however, is the body of what appears to have been a man in a suit that was handcuffed to a case full of money, signifying distrust. That is, until his arm was separated from his corpse right next to him. The man appears to have been shot by a third party, but all the cash remains untouched. I also noticed he was on a sleeping bag before his death, implying he wasn't just passing through, he was living there, or more than likely trapped there by the dead to his displeasure. Hoarding cash is a very early on in the outbreak thing to do, so I think this body's existence lends even more credence to Maggie's theory this place didn't last long after the world fell. Looking closer at some of the artwork on the wall, Daryl notices the graffiti tells some sort of story depicting what, in my opinion, appears to be class warfare in the apocalypse, possibly reflecting their own situation as the higher and lower class had been forced together. But now, thanks to the new world, they were on equal footing. But what leaves me stumped are the messages left behind. These almost look to have been written after the fact as a response to the art by somebody in an unhealthy state of mind. Or hell, maybe even the artist themselves at a later point in time. The phrase "keep your crown" clearly references the crown scene in the mural, which I believe represents materialistic wealth. And "it comes for us" seems to reference the dead looming in the background coming for them all whether they wear said crowns or not. Or maybe it's meant as an insult to the suited man and it's referencing greed as it's found directly above his sleeping area. Regardless, I think what we're supposed to take away from this, the camp had seen some sort of internal conflict that stemmed from the wealthy occupying the poor's home, despite material things like cash having no value anymore. Pushing deeper through the tunnel, tents appear disheveled and dust coats the items left behind. But in a bag full of snacks lies a $100 bill with a note from what is described as two children named Tom and Jesse, who found themselves living within the camp some point after the outbreak. But as written, their father had left into the wasteland for unknown reasons, possibly because of the aforementioned internal conflict brewing in the camp. But after not returning home, the mother would go searching herself, fearing for his life, leaving Tom to take care of his sister alone. After 3 weeks with no sign of their mother returning, Tom would make the decision to leave camp with Jesse to find their parents, leaving this note behind in case they ever happened to return to this place. Did Tom and Jesse ever reach their parents? Well, unfortunately, I don't think so, as while looking at the picture of the two left behind, Daryl notices a stuffed bunny in Jesse's hands, the same bunny found among the bodies wrapped in plastic. Although we don't see Tom and Jesse directly, I think this pretty heavily implies they were taken out by something before they escaped. And looking at the rest of the bodies left behind, I don't think it was walkers that got them. Down the tunnel a little deeper, Daryl discovers a single walker that initially appeared dormant in its sleeping bag, that seems to have been shot in the body or leg opposed to the head. Above it on the wall lies maps of the tunnels, with areas overrun with walkers labeled as demons. This tells me the tunnels were crawling with the dead since the early days, more than likely caused by the collapsing rubble, but also implies some within the camp believe this plague to be the wrath of God, which makes me question the message at the entrance of the subway. To me, this almost seems like some sort of sick response left behind, mocking those that were killed in the camp by whoever committed this act. But I don't know, maybe I'm off base with that one. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. But Daryl's time investigating would be cut short as screams from the missing Roy would be heard echoing through a long but small tunnel that was presumably used as the main way in or out of the camp. At least until somebody broke a hole in the other end, drawing Daryl away from the mystery left behind in this horrific place. Although Maggie and her crew did not have an easy time making it through the train cars, having sacrificed Gage to the dead who returned begging for help, they would reunite with Daryl, Roy, and Dog on the other side and escape the tunnels through the DeGard East Market metro station. Most would forget the tragedy left behind with the body bags in time, but much like us, Daryl would continue to wonder what could have happened to Tom and Jesse to not make it out, staring at the letter on the dollar bill as a reminder of what it means to be a parental figure and what could happen to their kids if something were to go wrong. Now, this is actually a pretty complex scene when you start to break it down. I think it's safe to say the less fortunate who occupied the camp before the outbreak, the wealthy who found themselves stuck within, and the regular families that made their way down all occupied this space simultaneously from the initial outbreak to the camp's eventual fall. As mentioned, worrying about cash is a very early on in the outbreak thing to do, and I find it hard to imagine two parents would take shelter with their kids right next to a walker in a sleeping bag and a dismembered corpse. Not to mention the giant mural that seems to depict some form of class warfare, reflecting the conflict that has arisen from their living situation. The body bags are a big WTF. There are so many there that it would be almost impossible for this to be the work of one person, leading me to believe it was an entire group who was responsible for this attack. With only one way in or out, it looks as if somebody had broke in from the neighboring tunnel, telling me this wasn't an inside job despite the clear signs of internal conflict. It was a third party who had been in the subway for another unrelated reason. I want to say it was the Reapers, but if we're going with the theory this happened early on, I don't think the timeline adds up, but maybe I'm wrong. Regardless, I'm just going to refer to this group as Raiders. I'm now going to attempt to piece together a story as to what happened here, but again, I am just theorizing based on what I've noticed, so it's entirely possible I could misinterpret or miss some evidence entirely. But like always, this is where you guys come in. I'd love to hear what you believe happened here in the comments down below. Before the world fell, Pyron Metro Station in the Washington area saw its tunnels occupied by a homeless camp hidden away from society. But after the dead began to walk, those occupying it actually found themselves in a better position than most, as they remained relatively safe from the walkers above. But in time, others would have the same idea, making their way down to the subway stations as the flames of Operation Cobalt burned. Unfortunately, many in the tunnels would lose their lives to falling debris and stray walkers, filling them with the dead around all corners and cutting off areas that were once accessible, like the entrance to the station itself that was used as a canvas by one of those living within the camp in the initial days after the fall, as a way to project their fear into creativity. But despite the chaos, their home still remained hidden from biters with its one entrance, and eventually, other survivors from within the tunnels would make their way through as well, like a mother and father along with their two young children named Tom and Jesse, setting themselves up inside as they believed it was better than living out in the wasteland. But others were simply using the tunnels as a way to get out of the city, and found themselves in the camp to their displeasure as the dead and collapsed debris blocked the path through. This is where our suited man with the case comes in. This person saw the camp as beneath him rather than a sanctuary, growing distrustful of those around him as the case he carried held thousands of dollars in cash. Little did he know, those around him didn't want his case, and probably wouldn't even have known what was in it if this person couldn't help but flaunt their wealth and talk down to the less fortunate, causing trouble from within over the coming weeks as they grew more and more agitated. Now, the artists discussed earlier had clearly put meaning behind their work as seen at the station's entrance, but after losing their initial canvas, This individual had begun to use their art as a way to protest against those who viewed themselves better than others within their camp, depicting the greed of man at the end of the world directly across from our suited man's sleeping area. This type of civil disobedience and animosity would continue to grow worse as the weeks went on, leading the father of the young Tom and Jesse to leave the tunnels in search of a better home, instructing his wife and children to move on from the camp if he didn't return. But the mother didn't listen, leaving her children behind in the tunnels as she attempted to bring her husband home, trusting Tom was old enough to take care of his sister without her. But she didn't return either, as tensions worsened at the camp over the next 3 weeks. So stealing a $100 bill from the suited man's case while he wasn't looking, Tom would write a note to his father in the event he returned to the camp to look for them, and hides it in a bag of his favorite snacks along with their picture. And as chaos erupted with the suited man noticing his case had been touched, Tom would seize the opportunity to sneak away with his sister and her stuffed bunny into the subway tunnels during the arguing, risking encountering the dead as they believed it was worth it to escape. The ordeal left behind would see the suited man snap out of paranoia, defiling the art and walls with sinister messages as frustrations from being trapped by the dead peaked. Alternatively, these messages are meant for the suited man and are a response to his poor behavior by the others within the camp. It's really hard to tell, so let me know what you guys think. We all know it only takes one person to ruin a good thing, and his greed over something that had no value anymore had left the entire camp distrustful of each other, concluding with the man handcuffing himself to the case he believed they all wanted following Tom's scheme. But this conflict would never reach its climax, as while Tom and Jesse snuck by the dead while traveling down the tunnels to escape, they would encounter raiders who guarded the entrance. As mentioned, it's possible this was a group like the Reapers, as they were active in the area, but it really depends on when they started killing civilians around that part of Washington. I kind of have a hard time believing they have been chilling within the same area for over 10 years, although I will concede the stealthful nature of the attack does fit their MO, so let me know what you think. Jesse would be taken by the raiders and threaten Tom into revealing the location of their camp, which he would comply, fearing for his sister's life, even telling them about the sealable entrance that would block their way. But unfortunately, these raiders would leave the kids for dead despite their promises before making their way to the hideout. Here, they would attempt to lure out the survivors within by smashing a hole in the wall, causing them to run out the exit right into their ambush. Some would be shot as they ran, others would be shot as they attempted to hide, but as far as we can tell, nobody made it out alive. I believe the suited man had been executed while attempting to protect his case, as the raiders expected guns inside, ripping the man's arm right off as they attempted to open it, but when successful, they would deem the cash inside worthless. The ultimate irony of the man's greed, as he and his money are left behind to rot. But what was the point of this? Why attack a camp unprovoked? Especially what was once a homeless camp that more than likely didn't have anything worth taking. Well, as we know, those who were killed were wrapped in plastic for transportation, getting their throats slashed so deep they can no longer make sound. So, my theory, whoever these raiders were had a plan to use the dead as a weapon against some form of community or settlement, slashing their throats as a tactic to keep them quiet for a surprise attack, and intending to store them in the tunnels in the meantime, only coming across Tom and Jesse by accident as they were escaping, and by extension, the whole camp before adding them to their collection. But this was a rush job they didn't expect, explaining why a walker or two may have been left behind during the roundup. The sheer amount of bodies here tell me most of these were brought in from the outside for storage. I don't think this many people could even fit in the camp, so I believe they simply added them to their collection after the massacre. I can't imagine it would be easy to put a moving walker in a body bag, so I think those found wrapped in plastic are all victims of raids that were bagged before turning for later use. Once everything was said and done, whoever led this sick act would take joy and humor in the art and messages left behind in the camp, marking the entrance of the tunnels with his own writing as not only a deterrent for the lost who may stumble across their army, but also as a way to mock those who lost their lives during their power trip. But you see, the tunnels continued to flood over time due to rain, so the grave site would often become inaccessible. And with the area becoming more and more scarce on supplies over the coming months, the raiders would eventually make the decision to move on from Washington, abandoning their dormant army altogether. All around, just a terrible waste of life. It's more than likely the tunnel camp would have imploded one way or another with the volatile nature of those within. But if those raiders hadn't arrived, Tom and Jesse, at the very least, would have made it out alive. Now, is my interpretation perfect? No, definitely not. I found it hard to place the writing on the walls, but I think the way I fit it in at the very least makes sense. Season 11 is all about class warfare, with the Commonwealth arc at the forefront, so I fully believe that's what was trying to be conveyed in the camp through the evidence left behind. We don't know Jesse and Tom 100% didn't make it out of the tunnels, but if I was a writer and I wanted to convey that message without showing it, the bunny left behind among the bodies is exactly how I would do it. I'm sure there are plenty of things I missed as this story takes place over 2 separate episodes and almost entirely in the dark. But that's where the fun of reading your comments comes from. As I mentioned at the beginning, these videos are meant to start discussions and theories over small scenes that are rarely talked about, not to convince you I'm right. So if you think something else happened here, please let me know in the comments down below, I'd love to hear it. But that's gonna do it for me today, folks. I truly appreciate each and every one of you for making it to the end. Thanks so much for watching.